Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Arsik and I studied geology at the Free University of Berlin. And now I study OEP here in Bonn. Unfortunately, I don't have much in the way of research yet, so I can't really present my own work or anything. I can, however, present something I found really interesting. I'd like to talk about a dinosaur I'm sure all of you know, the Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus was a big African Cretaceous theropod known for its crocodile-like snout, its sail-like back structure, and for having slayed the Tyrannosaurus in the third Jurassic Park movie. Well, T-Rex fanboys haven't forgiven it that one. As anyone who has been following academic discussions about it can tell you, there have been a lot of battles about this animal, specifically its locomotion and its lifestyle. Over the last 2 years, there have been basically two camps. One said it lived in the water, don't believe what Jurassic Park 3 told you, and the other basically thinks that while it ate fish, it did spend a lot of time on land. The thing that really sparked this debate was a paper by Nisa Ibrahim et al., whose title you can see here. To get some context, you first of all have to know that Spinosaurus is a really poorly known animal. We had a really good holotype specimen described by Ernst Thoma, but it became a casualty in World War II. Most of what we know from it is very fragmentary. One of the best known fossils for a long time has been a single upper jawbone described by Del Sasso et al. All of this suddenly changed in the year 2014, where Nisa Ibrahim and colleagues had a very interesting discovery to present to the world. They had found a partial Spinosaurus skeleton in the Chem beds that belonged to a subadult individual. It included fragments of the skull, the vertebral column, the rib cage, and most importantly of all, the legs. Yeah, the legs are gonna be really important here, especially since their proportions are a little off compared to those of other theropods. The hind limbs are unusually short, just a bit longer than the forelimbs. Hence, we got funny reconstructions like this one, where the Spinosaurus arms always almost touch the ground. Or this one, where Spinosaurus literally walks on all fours. So, for a while, people thought it was basically a prehistoric hippo. An animal that spent most of its time in the water because it needed the water to support itself, and that whenever it moved out, it moved like a hippo. To say that this caused controversy would be an understatement. Scott Hartman called the new Spinosaurus fishy and disagreed with the reconstruction. He thought that its hind limbs were way too short and that, in reality, our favorite fish-eating Mevaga carnivore did walk on land quite well. Likewise, Donald Henderson published a paper in which he argued that Spinosaurus was effectively incapable of diving down and that it couldn't have swam without toppling over thanks to its sail. He concluded that it was likely a perfectly capable terrestrial animal. Other papers supported the aquatic interpretation. In 2015, Gimza and colleagues, for example, suggested that Spinosaurus used its tail like a sailfish to trap large swarms of fish and devour them from all sides. You see, this is a very difficult debate here that won't end anytime soon. It only became more complicated once we learned that Spinosaurus had a paddle-like tail like a crocodile, but more on that later. Unfortunately, looking at Spinosaurus' closest relatives isn't the easy way out either. Many other Spinosaurids have a similarly scant fossil record, and all the evidence suggests that Spinosaurus was a weird animal even compared to its family full of weird animals. There is at least a general consensus that Spinosaurus spent a lot of time in the water and ate a lot of fish, as simple analysis of its bone isotope ratios show. So after this overlong introduction, let's get to the paper I wanted to talk about. In January 2021, Thomas Holtz and David Tone have published a paper about Spinosaurus and its ecology. As you can see from the title, they're looking at two possibilities. First, there's the wading model under which Spino was a generalist who lives at the shore, waited at the shoreline, and took the fish when they came to it like a bear with salmons. This model is the upper one of the two. Don't worry about the letters and arrows at all. I'll explain them later when we get to them. This model is assumed to be the general condition for Spinosaurids like Suchomimus and Baryonyx too. The second model is a pursuit predator model under which Spinosaurus went after fish in the rivers and caught its prey in the water column like a crocodile. Look at the second of the two reconstructions down below to see what it looks like. This model, if true, is assumed to be unique to Spinosaurus. Though a note of caution, most other Spinosaurids aren't quite as complete as it, so there might have been other highly aquatic species in the family. So, which of these two models is it going to be? In their study, the authors selected various cranial and postcranial features of Spinosaurus and compared them to extinct and extant reptiles of various lineages. If you count the letters over the arrows, A, B, C, D, E, they go until the letter W. So there's 24 traits that are being analyzed. The skull of Spinosaurus, for example, got compared to theropods and to crocodiles. They gathered data about criteria like how flattened the skull is and how the nose and the eyes are placed to see if it had them stick out of the water like a crocodile. Another part of the body they looked at was the shape of its claws. In previous works, they have been described as flattened and well suited for swimming. For the sake of this analysis, the authors compared them to claws of other theropods. So, what did they find out? Well, for the skull, they ran a principal component analysis since they had a lot of data. They found two principal components to which the skull parameters could be scaled. One parameter related to length. One is parameters related to length, which is PC1 here, the x-axis, and it explains more than 80% of the variance. The other parameters, the PC2, are all related to the position of the orbit. Oh, wait a minute. So I'm now going to explain what the colors here mean. The red point I so nicely marked with the X here is Spinosaurus. These green points here are just terrestrial taxa. The pale blue spots here are aquatic taxa. Sorry, the blue spots are aquatic taxa, while the pale blue are semi-aquatic taxa. This whole orange shape shows the morphospace of phytosaurs, and this dark brown shape shows the crocodiles. What we can conclude from this is that you can see that Spinosaurus is unsurprisingly most similar to other theropods in terms of its skull characteristics. And its skull isn't all that similar to that of marine reptiles. And that's not just about homology, it's also about the general functional morphology. For example, the noted aquatic or semi-aquatic reptiles have much more dorsally flattened skulls than Spinosaurus does. Also, the nose isn't as dorsally positioned as you would expect in an aquatic reptile. Aquatic reptiles, really like it to stick their nose out of the water to breathe. Here's a comparison between the skulls of Spinosaurus and Baryonyx. Their skulls, as well as their eye and nose placement, are very similar. So the idea that one was very strongly adapted to the water and the other was not is a little bit strange. What their skulls have in common is that their eyes and their nose are posteriorly retracted, as you can see here. They're in the behind portion, but they are not dorsally placed. This lack of dorsal placement means they couldn't have their noses or their eyes stick out of water. But the posterior placement indicates that they could still breathe and see when they had their snouts in the water when looking for fish. This indicates a semi-aquatic, but not an aquatic animal. Yeah, this drives this point really home. You see, option A is very uncomfortable option A is the only comfortable option for Spinosaurus, as here it can see and breathe. Option B, yeah, this is not very good. Like if it swam like that, then yeah, other animals would have seen simply. So that's not a good idea. And with option C, yeah, it would be very hard for Spinosaurus to catch air because it would take so long until its nose is outside. So you see it. So for contrast, this is what it looks like when a crocodile has its head submerged. You see, due to the dorsal placement of the nose and the fact that it has this little bulge in the nostrum, you see this bulge here, much more of the crocodile's skull is covered in water. But in Spinosaurus, all that's between the nose and the eyes would be exposed simply. And here's the stork skull for comparison, and you can see that while its eyes and its nose are very, very posterior, they're not dorsally placed. At least not as much as the crocodile. So the stork likes to stick its nose into the water, but it doesn't try to hide there or anything. And yeah, here the little scale bar of 100 millimeters for both, just so that you don't think a crocodile and a stork have a similarly sized skull or anything. And now I'd like to talk about the teeth, because the teeth are very similar to aquatic predators like mosasaurs or crocodiles. Yeah, this is not from the paper. I will not explain what the A, the B, or the C means, because this figure is just for illustrative purposes. It's just so that I have Spinosaurus teeth while I talk about Spinosaurus. The teeth are thin and with serrations. And this is very good for an aquatic predator. And why is that? Because when you have thin teeth, when you have long and thin teeth, you can stab very deeply into a fish. But if you were a terrestrial animal, you'd probably like short and sharp teeth with serrations so that you can take out flesh out of the height of a sauropod or anything. So these teeth do support an aquatic diet, but it doesn't necessarily mean they also had an aquatic lifestyle. The authors also cite a paper according to which Spinosaurus had a very high tooth replacement rate, which is backed up by the number of teeth we find overall, although it should be noted that we could simply have very good tooth preservation rate, as Spinosaurus lived near the water and that's where its teeth fell in. But a high tooth preservation rate would imply that it preyed on hard-shelled prey like cephalopods or some crabs. Yeah. Now, one last piece of evidence the authors looked at were little pores in the rostrum of Spinosaurus. It has been suggested that Spinosaurus had little pressure sensors like those crocodiles have to sense motion in the water. Now, the authors are highly skeptical that these types of holes and sinuses are unique to Spinosaurus in any way, because theropods like Neovenator or Daspletosaurus have been found to have kind of similar pores, and they probably didn't have pressure sensors. And even if Spinosaurus had pressure sensors to sense the motion of fish in the water, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was an aquatic animal. It could have. This would be consistent with a wading model where it would just have to stick its snout in the water, and then it could already feel the fish swim. In fact, if you've watched BC's excellent documentary Planet Dinosaur, which I can't recommend enough, they had a scene where Spinosaurus did exactly that. So where it basically stuck its nose in water and then it felt over the fish or something. Now, the conclusion is that the authors believe that the cranium all in all strongly supports the wading model. But now the question is, what does the post-cranial evidence show? But before I can go from cranium to post-cranium, I'd like to get to that one little part of the body that's at the border between the two kinda, and that's the neck. Thankfully, we now have neck bones thanks to the neotype. And one thing that can be noted is that the neck is long, really long. And it's also very gracile. Aquatic pursuit predators normally need short and stocky necks so that they can swim faster. However, a long neck can also help to catch fish, a lot of fish at once, so that could be interpreted either way. However, what is less ambiguous is those neck bones, because there you have seen cervical ribs that are like similar to those of Suchomimus, and which stabilize the neck basically, and they restrict Spinosaurus lateral neck movement. So in other words, it could move its head up and down very well. It could move its head up and down very well, but it couldn't move it so well to the side. Now, of course, a stable neck is very good when you want to swim fast, but if you already have a long neck, we better want it to be mobile. And a head that you can easily move up and down is very good if you need to strike down and catch the fish as they swim through the rivers and all. But if you like are underwater and you are in the middle of a fish swarm and you like just want to move to take as many bites out of it as quickly as possible, you'd like to have a neck that you can move in all directions. So it seems like the neck overall supports the wading model as well. And now that this is out of the way, we're going to look at the also controversial hind limbs. As I mentioned in the introduction, the neotype had unusually short hind limbs for a theropod. The unguys turned out to be much flatter than other theropods, because theropods normally like to have their foot claws to be curved and all. However, it turned out that angle shape is a rather poor predictor of ecology. Many terrestrial theropods like Raptor or Majungosaurus had similarly flat claws, and we just know that they lived on land. If flat feet show anything, then they just showed that the animal was very large and that it didn't want to sink in the mud. And for example, even in modern birds, you can see that ducks have very flat feet and they're swimmers, but flamingos also have very flat feet and they're waders. So this doesn't really prove anything. And yeah, the short legs have been used to show that it couldn't walk very well on land and that it had to use them to swim. But both Hone and Holtz believe that if it was an aquatic pursuit predator, it likely would have needed even shorter legs, because most aquatic pursuit predators don't use their legs all that much. Even crocodiles only use them so that they can push themselves forward and plunge onto the land where they drag the prey down, and Spinosaurus likely didn't do that. And because most pursuit predators just really use the tail for swimming. And if anything, the legs are fins or something, and that's not something Spinosaurus had. What Roberts also found out was that despite everything, Spinosaurus legs had an overall very normal muscle distribution. Because so over normal muscle distribution, which would imply that Spinosaurus could have still walked on land. It just couldn't run as fast as other theropods, but under the wading model, it didn't have to run after all the Ouranosaurus or something. It just had to move from one river to the next, and walking is just enough for that. And now, the authors also looked at the mysterious sail, this whole body part that gave Spinosaurus its name because of its spines and that made it famous. There has been a lot of speculation about what it did. People have suggested sexual display, fat storage, or thermal regulation. And while the dorsal sail is extremely well known, it's less well known that Spinosaurus also had a sail of sorts on the tail, which was not connected to the dorsal sail. Yeah, this tail sail or something has been discovered last year, and as this article here shows, so look at who wrote this. Who could this guy be? Yeah, his article, please share, comment, and follow us on social media. But I have to continue here. Yeah, as this brilliant article here shows, Spinosaurus has been shown to have caudal tail spines, caudal spines simply, which probably gave it a crocodile or newt-like tail. And yeah, computer simulations have shown that it could have used it as a fin or a pedal to propel itself. Given that this pedal tail existed, doesn't this support the aquatic pursuit predator model? Well, maybe. We have a modern analog we can use, namely the Basilisk. yeah, not this magical basilisk type from Harry Potter or something, but real basilisk. Um, uh, Basilisks often have a caudal and a dorsal sail that are not connected, much like a Spinosaurus, and they are semi-aquatic. However, they do not use the sail for swimming. They just they mostly use it for display purposes, much like newts do, or like a lot of other animals with sails do. Plus, we even have a terrestrial a Triassic diapsid that had caudal and dorsal spines too. It's called the Drepanosaurus, and it has been used as an analogy in the paper. And we believe it was fully terrestrial. So this is again this pedal-like sail is a good argument for the aquatic side, but it's like not as convincing as the supporters might think. Plus, it's worth noting that the chevrons, that is the bones in the lower part of the tail, are noticeably shorter and thicker than the neural spines, that is the upper portion of the tail. This doesn't make much sense when you think about it, because if it was used as a pedal, both sides of the tail must have been subject to the same pressures. The tail was most likely used for the same purposes as the dorsal sail, that is sexual display, thermoregulation or fat storage. Of course, what the dorsal sail did is a whole other can of worms, so we'll just leave it at saying that this tail fin does not necessarily prove it was a very aquatic animal. Now I'll talk about something that isn't a body part this time, namely, what does the general outlook tell us? How well was Spinosaurus able to swim overall? Because the authors dedicated an entire section to this question. And we'll return to data they gathered from the principal component analysis, and they used this to make statements about the body types of various aquatic predators. They found that the bodies of most aquatic pursuit predators had the features of being long, stiff, short-limbed, and having a long muscular tail for propelled swimming. Now, Spinosaurus had a less muscular tail than crocodiles, but a long and stiff body. And while its limbs weren't quite as short as the most aquatic predators, they were still not as long as the terrestrial animals either. So in overall body type, it doesn't seem like Spinosaurus was that different from the aquatic predators. However, there is a big but, and that but is called drag. Namely, the large sail and the large forelimbs, which Spinosaurus could not retract, show that Spinosaurus very likely had problems with simply experiencing drag. There's also the density issue, because Spinosaurus had pneumatic bones, much like other theropods, and they made its density lower and its volume higher compared to its mass, and they also decreased the drag. Like, normally divers want to be really dense, which is why crocodiles swallow these stones and all that. Therefore, it needed a lot of energy to dive. And it couldn't just swim at the surface, because that would have costed even more energy. Because if it swam closer to the surface, it would have tipped over, which Henderson pointed out in this paper. And Hohn and Holtz in their figure 9 have shown that if Spinosaurus wanted to swim without tipping to the side, it had to dive 6 meters deep. 6 meters, just imagine that. I can't dive that deep. And it's not even clear if most of the rivers Spinosaurus encountered even were 6 meters deep at all. What's clear is that as far as diving was concerned, there was no way it could have competed with crocodiles in terms of pursuit predation. Last but certainly not least, before we conclude this, we will look at the paleo habitat Spinosaurus lived in. We look at environmental factors. We look at the biota Spinosaurus lived in, the animals it coexisted with, and its presumed diet. Now, here's a map of the Kem Formation in Morocco, and most of the Spinosaurus remains are known from this locality. The Kempken beds show fluvial deposits full of aquatic life and with lots of megacarnivores, but surprisingly few terrestrial herbivores. This lack of herbivores, some authors argued, is what drove Spinosaurus into the water in the first place, because there it could prey on large fish such as this Onchopristis, which was this big sawfish that all of you who have seen Planet Dinosaur surely know, like this sawfish as big as a great white shark. But yeah, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Like some of us argued that Spinosaurus got into the water so that it could prey on these really big fish where it lived there, and if it spent more time on land, it wouldn't have found enough herbivores to feed its massive body. It'd have starved to death. Because like there was Sauronopsis, there was Carcharodontosaurus, there was so many predators that had to compete with on land. But there weren't many herbivores. There was maybe this Paralititan, this big sauropod, or this Ouranosaurus, but apart from these two, there wasn't all that much herbivores. And however, it is possible that Spinosaurus had a varied diet that sometimes included fish and sometimes dinosaurs. Because isotope analysis have shown that some specimens almost exclusively fed on fish, but other individuals were more varied in their diets. Likewise, it is possible that Spinosaurus existed in far more localities than in the Kempken beds, especially considering that a lot of Spinosaurids in Africa might have been synonyms of Spinosaurus aegypticus. While this predator undoubtedly ate more fish than most other theropods, that didn't mean that it only ate them. It could have been a generalist like a grizzly that in some regions specialized in fish and in other regions it ate something else. So what can we say in summary? It's probably no surprise that the authors strongly favor the wading model over the pursuit predator model, even though they implicitly note in the summary that they won't be able to settle the debate once and for all. More future findings can hopefully tell us what the situation was like in other Spinosaurids. While Spinosaurus was weird among them, it is nonetheless the most well-known and well-preserved taxon of its group, so there's still more to learn about the family as a whole. And thank you for listening.